Hello, everyone who is tuning in from wherever you are. A very warm welcome to the Academy session. I'm Leo Dizalit from Aleph, Vietnam, and I'll be your host for today. Academy has remained as a pilot for communities learning, and I am excited to have Christian's designer from Aleph, Singapore, to share about his topic, cross-cultural design. During my overseas study, I have chance to face with multicultural environments of France and Italy. It provokes a lot of my inner thought about this topic, and I cannot wait anymore to hear from Christian. During this session, if you have any questions for the speaker, feel free to use the YouTube comment section to drop your inquiries. So without any further ado, I will pass the stage to Christian.
Thank you. Thank you, Leo. And thanks to everyone who's tuning in today for the Academy session. My name is Christian, and I'm going to be your guide into the culturally responsive design. We live in the borderless world, and yet the boundaries are as tight as they've ever been. Technology brings people together, unites them, and yet cultural differences are becoming more apparent the more the global web intertwines with the real world. Today, when global unified solutions work no better than they did 100, 1,000 years ago, it only becomes apparent that localization requires a comprehensive cross-cultural approach. Cross-cultural design in general is the space that embraces cultural differences. It's the space that helps translate them into tangible solutions, both for the real and the digital world. In other words, cross-cultural design focuses on how cultural traits can inform design decisions better, from copywriting and imagery to journey mapping and business needs. But before we embark on this journey, before we dive deep into what makes cross-cultural design the only right approach to take in product development, let me tell you a little something about myself. My father's family fled the Nazis in the 30s and ended up in the Soviet Union. My mother's grandfather was a wealthy Persian landowner murdered by the Bolsheviks. I myself, coming from a very diverse background, graduated, majored in Asian and African Studies, Moscow State University. I studied Hebrew in the University of Jerusalem. I worked as a history teacher at a consulate school in Shanghai. So this love for cross-cultural borderless design naturally stems from my background. I have long struggled with and finally embraced this background. And now, as a designer and as a human, I'm convinced that everyone who's willing to build a strong sense of empathy goes basically the same way as I did. It's the inner and outer search that inevitably leads us to understanding that there's no universal goods, that there's no ring to fit every single finger, there's no hat to sit well in every wizard's head. When I first went to China in 2015, I experienced a culture shock. By literally everything that I saw there, I was shocked, from skyscrapers to street food. But the fact that actually fascinated me the most when I looked back at my times in mainland was the fact that everyone around me would wear pajamas. So you see, Shanghai is a cold city, and especially in winter, people don't seem to bother wearing a pajama while heading out to a grocery shop or a wet market. I was really shocked by something so trivial as a human being in cozy underwears. And I later discovered that the demand for winter pajamas was actually huge at the time. So an entire market I could have easily overlooked. And it was then when I actually asked myself for the first time, how can I design a product if I know nothing about the market? So I put together a little rule that says, stay outside of your bubble. So if you, as a designer, as a manager, an engineer, approach designing for another market, if you really want to leverage those unique cultural traits while also retaining recognition and brand presence, if you really want your product to meet the expectations of both your stakeholders and the people who are going to be using it, you need to stay outside of it. And let's first have a look at two simple cases, one of a success and another one of a failure. We'll start with, obviously, a letter. So in 2000, famous coffee chain named Starbucks decided to enter the Australian continent. They thought it was the time to conquer the unconquerable market. Starbucks was all over the world. It still is, and it was expanding rapidly. So it was only a matter of time before the kangaroos of the smallest continent could finally enjoy their Vegemite flavored latte. And Starbucks went there and they opened 87 shops in less than 8 years, only to shut them down a few years later. You see, the coffee brand did everything right except one thing. They thought of every single thing except culture. Their business strategy was weird and arguably poor, but more so was their ethnographic studies. It was basically non-existent. Starbucks neglected the fact that the Aussies love espresso in the morning. They love good coffee, and it stems from the Italian immigrants arriving in Australia in 1930s and bringing a taste for good coffee with it. So 12 teaspoons of sugar and a lot of cream on top of a cappuccino is not exactly what they would call coffee at the time. Starbucks understood their mistake a little too late. It took them a few years before they started closing the shops down, and now they've only got a few left. And the moral of the story is actually pretty simple. So before launching the product, you have to research the market. You have to look beyond your competitor analysis. You have to reach out to the community, talk to the people, watch for the red flags, listen to what the real people say before you make a call. And often we tend to overlook those calls. We don't see them because the numbers blind us, the possibility of success. And there are stories of success, as I promised, like that one of KFC. We all know KFC is this chicken restaurant, the one that we go to when we want some American food or some fast food. But KFC remains the most popular fast food chain in China. They've got over 5,000 restaurants in 1,100 cities, and they open new ones every single day. And the majority of this success is actually due to a perfect localization. KFC does not only serve fried chicken, they serve a lot of local dishes like egg tarts, congee, dragon twister, even street food. They're getting criticized for the latter, but still, it dominates the market. They research the needs of the client, and they make sure they sustain this image of a clean, unique, and exciting but local fast food restaurant, just a little dash of American connotation. So at the end of the day, there's only one way, and there's only one step you need to take before you think about launching a product. It's to localize it. It goes far beyond just translating the copies and swapping the images, though. Understanding how to approach localization the right way always begins with understanding the culture, and first and foremost, the culture of communication. It's actually a brilliant framework that helps with it. See, in the 1950s, Edward T. Hall theorized that cultures could be divided into two major groups based on the style in which they communicate. So he noticed that Scandinavians and Germans, they tend to communicate through explicit statements, while Japanese and Chinese and Arabs, they would often use body language and tone of voice and silence even. A lot of those facial expressions and changes in tone that are not explicitly stated but still impact the meaning of what's being said. So basically, a no in German is essentially a definite and solid no, but in Arabic, for instance, it might mean anything from call me tomorrow, we talk again, or yeah, let's go eat. This contextualization impacts the way people consume information everywhere, in the web including. Well, low context culture prefers short and direct messages, The high context ones actually require some, well, context. They need to either provide it or compensate for the lack of thereof, making it look like the page is what we would call cluttered. Take a look at the two examples here, McDonald's in the US and McDonald's in China. They retain the brand image, got the same familiar colors, and the same familiar product, but it's still localized. The US version is simple, minimal, and it's got one element in focus, while the Chinese has got two navigations. One is floating, and four giant banners with a lot of information that's just screaming with context. So when designers are localizing their product, they need to strive to create a similar expression to similar experience to the one that people are having while communicating. Users from high context culture, for instance, are expecting the pages to have some real meat, some real and relevant information. And the more they get, the better. Just look at another example here, the Airbnb in Singapore in English and the Chinese version of Airbnb. They look very familiar, but they are different still. And those minor subtle differences like colorful tags or active search bar or visible reviews right away is what makes the experience so different. So sometimes it helps to add some more elements, or maybe like in case of Airbnb, not use some unfamiliar symbol. Research, for instance, proved that magnifying glass really doesn't create a mental connection for the Chinese users, and they often overlook it. So the localization is not only about creating something that would be deemed as complicated or convenient by others. It is also keeping in mind a lot of cultural traits, like symbols. You see, symbols, imagery, words, phrases, colors, they can have different meanings in different cultures. So as you see here, different colors can represent different emotions. And the same goes for a lot of things. So red can represent growth in one culture, but can also stand for a downfall for another. In a way, it gets so complicated that sometimes even the terms may be mixed up. So for instance, a few months ago, we were working on one of the products for Thai markets, and we've been researching the uses when we came across this term life expectancy. So according to our local research team that actually spoke to the users, this term that they selected for life expectancy could mean two different things. So on one hand, it had the natural medical life expectancy meaning, but on the second, it brought up some superstitious beliefs, like something predetermined by the highest power, the divine. And apparently people were actually very hesitant about it. They thought that only that power could determine how much longer they have to live, and nothing else can impact that. And we, while building an application that would impact your behavior and your lifestyle, could not use it anymore because half of our population would not see the point in seeing their life expectancy in this way. So when you're building the product, you have to research and discover the stories like that one. And that is exactly the point where you start questioning your assumptions. That is the point where you have things that look brilliant on paper, but in reality, this is not what people accept. This is not what they believe in, what they value, and most importantly, what they trust. And by eliminating those, by understanding what your target audience actually thinks, what they hear, what they feel, and what they're ready to accept, you avoid a potential disaster, a collapse, and you are getting ready to how your product will be accepted by this very culture. In the late 1960s, Geert Hofstede discovered what he called the cultural dimensions theory, or a framework of cultural communication. Basically developed a theory that covered a lot of different aspects, most of the aspects that define the culture and impact human behavior in a way. So from distance to power, how close people are to their superiors, how likely are they to challenge authority, individualist versus collectivist mindsets, masculinity or femininity, long and short-term orientation, and others. This model helps us, first of all, break down cultures into different buckets, but most importantly, understand what people are likely to value the most. Intimate one-on-one communication with close friends, or a big hangout with a bunch of relatives and random people. Private chats or group discussions. Will they spend their money on a Gucci bag, or are they likely to put aside it for the retirement, right? So this model, despite some natural limitations, it actually gives a very good and a very comprehensive framework. It helps estimate how the people would react to the product. So when preparing for the launch, when getting ready to design and ship the product, you actually need to do a lot of research, but it also helps to get rid of one awful thing. And that thing is the stereotypes. So some people do think that stereotypes are still funny, but honestly, stereotypes are exactly what makes the half-baked fakes. There is nothing worse than those half-baked products that are just trying to imitate authenticity. Fakes rely on those stereotypes. They think that if they are convinced that this is how things work, that is exactly how it works with that particular market. And there are a lot of things that stem from it, like stereotypography, when the typography tries to imitate this authenticity. But it's really important to understand that fakes don't really outlive their makers. Lazily put together posters with some stereotypography and poorly translated copies, they are part of the recipe for a disaster. They are what makes a failure, definite. So despite the fact that the topic of cross-cultural design is actually very complex, there is a recipe. And it's pretty simple if you pinpoint it to a couple of points. So the first step you need to take if you want to ship an international product or design for a foreign market is do a research. Ask who live in this particular country or the region. What languages do they speak? How do they communicate? Talk to the people and learn from them and learn of them. Always consider the context, the communication, the symbols, even the technology that empowers it. And most importantly, accept the fact that you do not know it all. And even if you think that you do your research anyway. I always like to say that studying, especially studying history, is one of the most important things that give the designer their superpowers. So history is a perfect teacher. It basically gives the lessons that you should not neglect, because knowing history is basically like having a nuclear bomb while fighting a cavalry from the medieval times. Knowing the history is crucial to understanding present. It is like knowing what the next step would be before you take it, because history repeats itself. The third thing is getting curious. And that is, in experience, one of the toughest steps. Once you've done your research, once you've learned your lessons, you need to start asking unusual questions. It might seem weird. Why would I want to know what Filipinos eat for breakfast, or how do Russians celebrate New Year? But in fact, those little details are often overlooked, but they are what makes a great impact. So use them wisely, and they would help you craft your unique experience. Don't be afraid to sound ridiculous and awkward. Be afraid to stay silent. See, culture is a very complex topic, but learning new things is one of the most exciting things you can do. So remember, good products are built with empathy and caring. So like learning a few phrases in a foreign language, discovering some weird historical facts, making some new local friends, that sounds like a journey. Designing for global audiences is a complex approach, and it's always informed by knowledge, but empowered by passion. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Over to you, Leo. We good? They make sure they sustain this image of a clean, unique, and exciting but local fast food restaurant. Just a little dash of American connotation. So at the end of the day, there's only one way, and there's only one step you need to take before you think about launching a product. Is to localize it. It goes far beyond just translating the copies and swapping the images, though.
Okay. Thank you, Chris, for such an amazing presentation. Controlled by you. Yeah, so coming to our session today, I proudly introduce our special guest for the panelists. And the first one, Avin, our boss, CEO and founder of Aleph, the traveler who seek adventure whenever he made his mark. To many trips, he get to meet people from all walks of life and makes interaction with people with different cultural backgrounds. He pushed for Aleph in becoming a diverse organization as he see value in diversity. And the next one, I have Bob, a senior engineer who is currently working in Malaysia. Through his journey with Aleph, he has delivered various projects for the Malaysian consumer as well as interacts with teams from various regions. And the last one, Gilroy, a UI UX designer based in Jakarta, Indonesia, who has been with Aleph for the last 5 years. During his experience with us, he has translated a lot of user needs, pain and gains, business insight, and technical requirements into simple, beautiful, and engaging experience from the design perspective. And here are the panelists for our academy session today. So yeah, I have some questions for you guys. And the first one, I really want to ask you, Bob. Yeah, have you guys ever experienced a culture shock when you make your move? Yeah, Bob.
Yeah, obviously it was a major culture shock coming to Malaysia for me. Although I really thought I was prepared for it. I really thought I would handle it pretty well because I've traveled pretty extensively, working in Italy and the United States. But they're so similar. Although they are a different culture, I wasn't really prepared for the complete 180 shift in culture that I experienced over here in Malaysia.
Cool.
Yeah.
What about you, Gilroy?
Yep. So I think for me, I have traveled a lot, quite a lot, within my time just in Aleph. So I went to Thailand and a few markets. So one thing that I learned is that I'm quite shocked when I visit Thailand because I used to designing for Singapore and then Indonesian markets. But when I go to Thailand market, I kind of quite shocked in terms of how the design will have certain density and then how the language will work. So that's how I learned design system and how I learned to adapt more in terms of content, just to localize it a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah. And I have one question for my boss, Arvin. Yeah, we might have chance to work with many multinational clients. So this is maybe a tricky question, but what if they want to adapt their HQ approach similarly to every countries? Do you have any suggestion, any solution?
So I think first of all, I want to thank Chris. I mean, this is such an interesting topic, and before I answer this, Leo, I want to kind of take a step back to a memory lane. 5 or 6 years ago, we brought so many companies together and started calling it Aleph. And we had this one big workshop. I think just need presented few in the lunch talks, in the hot potato. And we had a big vision that this is how the LF is going to look like: one company, one PNL, everybody works together as a one team, and so on and so forth. Walking out of that meeting that very day, I feel that we all realized that yes, we can all have one vision, but we need to kind of make sure that the team in Indonesia behaves like Indonesia, team in Vietnam behaves like Vietnam and Thailand. And I think one of these reasons we adapted, and we went ahead and said that there is no offshore location in LF. All the countries team would kind of work for there, and we started using the term called borderless rather than one PNL. Now, coming to your question, right, is if the client tells us to adapt, I think we have many clients, right? I think UOB tomorrow is one of that, where I clearly remember they kind of going back and saying, oh, no, we will decide, we will do everything in Singapore, and then we will launch it in these markets. But fast forward, I mean, we could not influence them that much, but fast forward, we just had a lunch with the senior management, and now he's saying that, oh, we needed to launch something again in Thailand. And you remember we had some people in Thailand who could work for us, or also in Indonesia who could work for us. So sometimes you can push, but sometimes you can't do much influence. But I think it's a circle. Client realize and they come back.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I see that at Aleph we embrace inclusivity from hiring to promoting. So what do you think about the role of design leadership in a cross-cultural environment?
So I think this is, look, the culture to me is not a one-time effort, or inclusivity is not a one-time effort. You can't just say that we are an inclusive company. I mean, the day we started LF, right, we were inclusive company. But as you grow, the meaning of inclusivity change, the purpose of why you are doing, and then it needs to kind of dwell down and down and down. So I think it's an everyday effort. Every day you need to kind of do something to make it inclusive. And I think it's same with the design as well, right? I think the people changes, things changes. You need to kind of adapt and adapt and adapt. I still remember, right, the kind of designs which we used to do in Indonesia, and our clients used to go like, oh my God, now if we present those designs, are like, no, we don't want to talk to you also. So even those markets have evolved and shifted, right, in terms of their thinking as well.
Okay. Yeah. So I also want as I will pass the mic to Bob. Yeah. So you see, as you see from the presentation of Chris, so I want to ask you about what is your thought about cross-cultural design from your personal perspective? Is there any key takeaway that you want to let audience know?
I mean, for cross-cultural design, really it just has to be completely focused on user first. As long as you fully understand each user that you expect to be using your platform, then the problem is getting that depth of understanding, from the outside of a culture is tricky, but I think with enough research you can get there.
And
I can
as you
also
see
add,
from the Chris presentation,
yeah, may I add something here? Okay, so I think when we talk about culture in design, right? Recently, I just learned something quite interesting. So when we design something, usually we just because we've done this a lot of time, like multiple times, and we feel like we are on top of everything. We feel like we know the user. We feel like we know the patterns and everything. But recently, I just quite shocked that I'm forgot something about culture. Even though we are designing an app, a solution for Indonesian market, but we forget that Indonesia is the most diverse country. We have hundreds of tribes, hundreds of language, and hundreds of beliefs also in different area. So when we design, when we go to the clients, we are kind of just going there and then just okay, we need to do this, we need to do this. Everything looks fine, looks great. But then when we came to like content personalization, we are just thinking of a simple metrics on how we can, in terms of content strategy and in terms how we can personalize this data. We just kind of we create a simple metrics, and then this is how it will goes, and then we differentiate by based on persona, and then all the things, right? But then we realized that even for Indonesian market, we are serving millions of customer. We are serving multiple province. We are serving multiple people from multiple background. So when we have this more in-depth research, we find out something that is really interesting in terms of content. So based on the metric that we did previously, it was a cool metrics. It's a simple and it's working fine with the technology and everything. But when we test this out to the real user, we find out that some of the content it still need to be localized. So we are kind of shocked. Oh, what's happening here? Even for Indonesian market, we still have to make it more tap into the culture, and then we need to understand from each different persona, how they behave, what they believe. So just one quick example. When we designing this content, we are kind of helping this small, medium enterprise, and then we are trying to give multiple content, multiple suggestion, like, oh, maybe you like this, you should take this, and then we kind of cross-sell with some other SME. For example, someone is selling a fish, and then we can bundle this up with an article. If you eat a fish, then this is healthy for you. But turns out, when we find out in certain area, certain fish, we cannot just suggest this to these people because they are superstitious and they have this belief that if you eat this fish, you will be cursed and you will have something like a disease. So this is something that we didn't capture. So how we capture this to real customer, and we just have to turn our ego. We just have to empty our glass and come to the user, ask what Chris just present to us, just a stupid thing, something that is unexpected, and we can get real data, real insight from there. And then after we know this, we kind of go back to the metrics that we have, and then from there we design an even more structured and even more personalized metrics to bring the right content for the user. So first of all, we just in the beginning we just like seeing okay, Indonesian, that's it. But after we understand the user, we kind of segregate and then differentiate and group them into more this kind of behavior, belief, and what they value. So I think it's a great lesson. So don't think of yourself like you know everything. Always go back to the user because we are designing for people, for human.
Yeah, you definitely remind me a book called "The Ego is the Enemy." Yeah.
Exactly.
During our conversation, we talked about the localization, right? And the word localization goes everywhere. So, eh, so Bob, how do you translate the localization into your engineering workflow? How we tackle the word localization?
Well, localization to me means language, unfortunately. But I think the first time that I encountered that was working in Italy. Whenever I was building websites there, and I would build in English. Obviously, they would need it translated into Italian, but I would build in English because that was easiest for me. And not realizing that generally word lengths are longer in Italian than they are in English. As soon as they changed it to Italian, the design all broke. So I learned a pretty valuable lesson from that one, and actually ended up applying that in a project at Aleph for Inman Bank. Whenever we were building a page in English, it had to be translated into Mandarin as well. So instead of building in English, I got the guys to build in Mandarin as well, so that we could see the different sizes of words and the spacings that were required for it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
that reminds me
Brazil.
of Thailand also. When we designed something for Thailand, right, the other day, multiple apps. When we look at the pages, it's fine like this, and then when we translate to Thailand, from one pages it could be like 2 pages after that, and then we did not even care about that. So I think that's a hard lesson also.
Yeah. Yeah, this question is for you, Chris. During your presentation, some of our YouTube subscribers say that what is the Singapore stereotype from your point of view?
I think, Chris, you're on a mute.
I think you change your microphone or your headset. What's the question again? I can help to ask.
Sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, good. Okay. Right, thanks. Sorry, I got a technical glitch over here. So I think stereotypes are a little bit subjective, right? They somewhat depend on where you're coming from personally, where you grew up, and what people tend to believe in your particular culture, right? In your particular area. In my case, prior to coming to Singapore, I really never thought of that. There was just basically a couple of things you would know about Singapore before going in, and the only thing anyone I know would essentially say that, hey, is this the place that banned chewing gum? And that would be the stereotype, right? Other than that, people are seriously asking me if you can or cannot like fit the pigeons here, or this like death sentence for literally anything. But on the other hand, everyone thinks of Singapore as this green and futuristic city that completely abandoned all the practices that we deem like outdated in the other parts of the world, be it paperwork or essentially all that we think that is that already belongs in the dumpster, right? In this case, it's also a poisonous mindset, right? And if you become the victim of stereotype of any kind, whether it's a good one, what you see is a good one, quote unquote, right? Or if it's a bad stereotype, like straight away offensive one, this is not what you would want to adopt as a mindset, as a designer, as a product person of any kind, and ideally as any kind of person. Once you adopt a stereotype, you belong to it and you become its victim. Right?
Sorry, Leo, you are on mute now.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Chris, I understand that you have been working on project for multiple regions, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore. So during your time with Aleph, have you ever facing some cultural shock with the customer, with the end user?
Literally all the time. So practically, jokes aside, cultural shock in my case is a pretty standard state, and I sort of embrace it in a good way. the state where you get so immersed in the culture and you're absolutely ready to do anything it takes to just get a hold of it, right? When I first went to the Philippines a few years ago, that was an unbelievable experience, right? And since Philippines is a beautiful country, right? And there's so many different places that look and feel completely different. The area where we stayed at, BGC, right, was so advanced. It was like a local Manhattan. And then you go to a local bar with the local people and you get to know the real place, right? That's kind of experience, especially when you try local food. And that's the thing that I miss the most. But even now, when we were digitally, right, I got to learn about Vietnam a lot more than I ever did working with you, Leo. Right, I got to work with people from Thailand, and I got to talk to them, and literally got a chance to work with Thai market for the first time. That was again another cultural shock. You get to experience something you've never tried before, and that's always shocking. But again, it's only a matter of how you take it. You should always be embracing it rather than being afraid of it, right?
Yeah. So over the year, which market in Asia have you see that have the most diverse in the design culture?
I guess that's a very good question for the panel as well. You guys might want to chime in and support me on that one. Personally, since I've been working with China quite a lot, I saw a drastic change, right, in what was the essentially perceived as design, right, in the early 2000s, in what is now basically and I'm mostly talking about web, basically, because I'm designing experiences for web and mobile. But what came out of the emerging market of Asia, right, and the second world economy, that is the biggest shift to me, and that's essentially the market that managed to adapt the best practices from the West and from the East, and at the same time, it remained authentic and it remained true to itself. It embraced the contextuality of the culture. It essentially didn't try to mimic others like many markets try to do, and essentially come across the problem of not meeting the expectations of the customers, right? So what happened to mainland China and what happened to Chinese web design, as a person who lived there for quite some time, as a person who's still got very tight connection to it, that's probably the biggest shift of all. But Arvind, Gilroy, you guys might want to comment on that one.
Yep. So I think in terms of Indonesian market, it's also I think the same thing. So if we look back into a few years ago, I think when we first like trying to build all this app and try to get the concept, usually it's about a super app, and then why the reason why is because a lot of people still adopting to this new technology, and a lot of products they wanted to show that they have everything. So it's a shift in culture and the way we design it. But after a while, we kind of map out right now a certain area in Indonesia, they already have this digital adaptation like at certain stage, which is they are more matured, I would say. But then in certain area, they still not even have a internet connection. So by knowing really specifically when we are going to launch the product in Indonesia, we need to categorize it into this user segment, not just labeling it like Indonesian, but maybe this is Indonesian of which part, and then we can localize on how they behave, how they currently on their which stage they are currently. So when we design, we always usually on the like strategy when we're releasing something, we kind of pick some local area first and then test it out, and then if it's working, then we create some like in other city. For example, like a few products like Bayu, we launch it in Bogor first, and then after that we launch in Bandung, in Jakarta. So we kind of choose the city, and then after that we kind of go bigger and bigger, and then building multiple suggestion, multiple input from that certain area to make it even a whole, so that currently we can serve millions of people. We cannot jump into serving million people just in one night, but The way we launch it is basically localize it into the city, and then after that, city by city, we conquer, and then we serve million in Indonesia.
What about you, Avi?
Maybe Leo, I mean, I think among all of you, I'm the granddad here for designs, right? So, so I think when I still remember when we started designing, it was all about look and feel. There was no concept called UX, right? I'm talking about what 15 years ago when we started Aleph. Um, and then the whole range of the things came from is that everything should have shadows. I still remember, right, is that how much shadow you want to kind of put it uh, so that it feels that it's as a depth. And then comes the designs which were um, living designs, like so you wanted to emulate the entire book inside the iPhone, or make design as much as same as the physical design looks like. And then we moved on to it, minimal designs with very simple things. Um, but I think in the last few years, I see the big shift because, like what Gilroy said, is that the digital adoption kind of went very, very high. Previously, these designs were used by the people who already knew computers, who we do a lot of money was riding. Your service did not depend on that, but now the shift has taken place. So I think the phrase we started a few years ago was empathy-based designs. So we started kind of testing with the users and seeing whether they relate or not. Then we started having a purposeful designs, right? Is that does design does the purpose or not? Then we started having a data-driven design, whether we are able to kind of see from a data, right, whether the designs are doing not. Right now, everything which we do before even we start the designs, there's a lot of research being done. Right. I mean, if you asked us 2 years ago at Aleph as well, I mean, the research was always an afterthought. Now I can see a complete shift in terms of how research comes first before we even kind of start thinking about designs. And even if once we have designed it, we want to test it before we launch it. Right. It has kind of evolved quite a lot. So to me, at certain places, the design is becoming more borderless, right? That we can. But also, I do completely understand that for each market, we need to understand the sensitivity. But the basics of designs have been lifted by all the regions, right? Now it doesn't matter. A few years ago, if you go and ask somebody in Vietnam that we're going to do some research before we're going to give you the design, this guy would look at it as, sorry, what do you mean? Same in Indonesia, right? But now, if you don't have a research team and if you don't have a testing team, they don't kind of understand. So I feel that in all the markets, I think we have all lifted ourselves and we have grown with this whole thought.
Yeah. So, is there any market that now you really want to explore? Maybe somewhere you haven't had a chance to step foot.
So look, I think I always thought in Southeast Asia, China has a lot of influence because all the super apps comes in China first, then comes to this part of the world, right? Because a lot of influence of money being poured from Chinese investors to Indonesia to Singapore, right? So they automatically have. The one country where I feel that the design is pretty unique, right, is Japan. Right, I feel that the Japanese way of looking at the things, either it can be a very Hello Kitty, right, or it can be very sophisticated, right, very Zen style. So how do you kind of set the balance, right? To me, that's a one market where I have never understood design. Like, from which lens do you see? Right, you walk into the markets, right, they are like so glittery, so well lit up, and then you go into the temple, there's nothing, it's just a stone, right? And how they kind of keep their gardens, it's so amazing. So I would love to explore, like, my dream is to kind of have a big studio in Japan at some point of time in our life, right? So fingers crossed.
Yeah. Okay. As you see, so now we are on the web. Many digital products are built by us. I recently watched a documentary on Netflix called "The Coded by Us." It's all about the skin color matter, that kind of thing. So that's question for all you guys. How designers how creators can make the change for that problem. Maybe I can ask you, Bob. You're on mute.
I mean, I'm not really a designer. Maybe you could ask one of the other guys here first.
Yeah,
I can contribute.
It's always good to have a non-designer's perspective, you know, because people who are working closely with us, but then maybe not shipping the designs themselves, are usually the most interesting ones to ask about design.
Yeah.
Because they would be, yes, I know how those guys work. And you also see a lot of stereotypes in here. The perception of designers' work is also a bit distorted, you know.
I am a bit of a victim of stereotypes myself, but yeah, being Irish.
Yep.
Yeah, since I started talking, I'm probably gonna answer that and just pass it on to you guys. I basically emphasized a lot in my presentation that it's important to learn history. I also want to highlight that it's not just reading through the history books, or you know, just getting a book by Plato and thinking that you know everything in the world, right? Physically, you cannot travel, but you've got a really great tool at your disposal that people some 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, didn't really have. It's the internet. You've got another thing that is online schools and online education. If you can learn and pick up a language, if you can just come in, like find some people that live abroad that you'd really want to connect to. If you want to learn something about other markets, try to broaden your horizons like that. Don't stick to only British TV shows or only American TV or only games produced in, I don't know, in Russia, whatever. Try to find diversity in yourself and in the world that surrounds you. Try to try things, and don't set the boundaries that would essentially limit your potential. And that is.
Yeah, I think it's cool. Yeah, actually we coming to an end. So I think that during our conversation, the go global and embrace local is something that's the key takeaway of our discussion. Yeah, I think that is good norm we can think about when building a multicultural design practice. Yeah, so thank you and thank Chris for your amazing presentation. Thank you, Gilroy, Bob, and Avin. Your ideas is very valuable for all of us. And yeah, I have to say, I thank you everyone who is tuning in on the YouTube today. We really appreciate your interest with alephacademy. And if you have any questions, feel free to send yours to our email address at academy@alephlab.com. And I think that's the name. And happy Friday. And we will see you soon.